Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started here. It's a little bit after 12 o'clock. I'm Beth Kuchar, chairperson of Innovate Pasadena, and today I'm really pleased to introduce Tyler Menezes. Did I get your last name right? I
That
think I
was
massacred it.
probably, no, that was probably the best that I've heard so far. So
Great. Well, Tyler is a startup founder and he's the executive director of Code Day, which is a not-for-profit group which promotes STEM education for high school and college students. And he is joining us today to answer your questions about being a successful mentor. So Tyler, thank you so much for joining us.
yeah, thank you. And I can give a brief introduction about myself. Beth already did a pretty good job of the, really quick summary. I was a former founder of a tech startup that was backed by Y Combinator and a bunch of tech investors. So I kind of know the tech sector. But I moved over into nonprofits and specifically working on CS education and trying to get more people interested in computer science and helping them transition into careers. A lot of what we do is really heavily based around mentors and having mentors help students. So I think that's kind of why I am hopefully one of the experts in the field of mentoring to some extent. We're running one of the big things that we run is a program called Code Day Labs, which I think is probably the most relevant thing to this group. And the idea is basically to provide an internship-like experience to students who can't get one, either because they work part-time jobs, or they often go to community college or something like that, and they need to keep the same job for financial support, or because they, they just have difficulty finding an internship. And so from that, we've had thousands of hours of meetings with their mentors and sort of help them create projects like that. If you're in the tech industry as a, either a programmer or like a project manager or something like that, we're currently looking for mentors for this upcoming year. So if you'd like to sign up for that, just visit us at codeday.org and click on labs. Yeah, so that's kind of where a lot of the experiences come from is from working with a lot of these students. And I've also done some consulting with other organizations. So that's the short of it.
Great. Well, we do have some questions that our audience actually has asked us already. They've asked you already. So I'd love to tackle those questions. And again, remind everyone in the audience, if you have a question for Tyler, please type it in the Q&A or in the chat, and he will be happy to answer your questions.
Cool. Yeah, so I see the first question is, how do you set goals to make sure a mentoring relationship is successful? So I think, first of all, one of the most important things is to figure out what we mean when we say mentoring. It means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Even if you go and look at like academic research on mentoring, like everyone defines it slightly differently, and it's kind of difficult to figure out what's what. In general, I think the key points are kind of that, one, it's like a long-term sort of focused relationship. It's not day-to-day, right? It's not, you're thinking about day-to-day advice on helping people succeed. You're thinking of managers. So it's like a long-term sort of caring about their growth, professional career, et cetera, I guess is the way to think about it. Again, just not thinking about the day-to-day stuff. And then the last thing that I had written down when I think about what mentoring is just kind of like it's a reciprocal relationship. Like the mentee and the mentor are, it's not purely a top-down, like here's what you need to do sort of thing that that you get in a formal hierarchy. It's like it's a relationship. It goes both ways. So using that definition of mentoring, like how do we set goals? Well, like what are the things that mentoring can and can't do? Like what are the things that mentoring is really good at is when people are in a new situation that they haven't been in before, mentoring is really good at helping them become comfortable, helping them calibrate with how things are done in that position. So if you think if you're a new college student or a new employee or even a new manager, mentoring is going to be really good at those things. It's not going to be very good for like hard defined like OKRs. Like you can't really come up with an OKR per se for a mentor. It tends to be much better for those things that are a little bit more, like helping people to calibrate their norms and helping people feel comfortable. So when you're talking about goals, like at the individual level, if you are going to be a mentor for someone, the goals are really up to the mentee and the mentor to kind of come to together. And one of the things that we always recommend with our mentors is that they start off by discussing that with the mentee and just try to figure out what they're trying to get out of this. I usually break it down into like, what are the career goals that they have? Where do they see themselves? Do they want to, if you're talking about tech companies, do you want to be a manager or do you want to be an individual contributor? That's a really big decision that people need to make that maybe they've never even thought of. What are their goals for professional development? What do they want to learn how to do? What are their goals for networking? Who do they want to know? That's something, again, that many people have never thought of. And then what are their goals for like the enjoyment of their life is another thing that I often don't see people think about. And if you kind of come to that agreement early on in the mentoring relationship, it kind of makes sure that it works for both of you. If you're talking about company-wide, like how do you set goals? The way that I look at it is the leading indicators for mentors. Like if you're setting up a company program for mentors and you want to know how it's going, generally you're going to want to make sure that they're covering certain content. I think we'll talk about this for one of the other questions that I saw later, but like the content that is relevant to the job is generally going to be like, there's going to be certain things that you're going to want to make sure that the mentors are going to have a conversation about. So making sure that they're covering that is kind of a good leading indicator. And then mentor-mentee perception is another one. So for a lot of our programs and a lot of the programs I've worked with other people, we do regular surveys with the mentors and the mentees to see how they feel like it's going. Sometimes you maybe even just have the wrong mentor, but like obviously if the entire thing is just going off the rails, that's a good leading indicator that you can start to make changes. Outputs. So when we talked about like what it does, what it can do, it's really good for that, like helping people feel comfortable in a new situation. Retention is one of the big things that you want to look at. Typically with mentoring, you'll see really big increases to retention of employees in a new role. And then there's a medium effect in performance. And I think there was a question about that later as well. And we can dive more into that. But typically, if you're trying to measure outputs and you're trying to set goals for this, you'll generally want your goals to be focused around retention. That's kind of the reason a lot of companies start mentoring. Cool. What are some common do's and don'ts for a mentor? So going back to that kind of definition as like it is a personal relationship, a lot of the common things that I see that people either do need to do or people are doing that they shouldn't be kind of come back to treating it as a more of a business relationship. And obviously to some extent it is if it's coming from a company or something. But or a school or whatever else, if it's some sort of formal program, there's some amount of a business relationship, but you need to think of it first and foremost as you're trying to build a connection with someone. You're not just trying to go through a training program. So if you're a company that wants to set up a mentorship program, or even if you want to be a mentor to someone, one thing that you should definitely do is try to save duplicated work. So an example of this is like a lot of our mentorship has been with college students. We know, and I think this actually goes to the next question. We know that there are certain problems that most, like 99% of college students always need mentorship on. And if we can give mentors a list of have these discussions with people, that's great. Like that saves them the work from figuring out what discussions they need to have. Do be an expert on like really common problems like that. Again, if you're setting up a program, or even if you want to do this for your own thing and you just want to have some talking points, that's great. Like talking points on common things are great. One super common thing is resumes with college students. College students don't know anything about resumes. If you want to put together some talking points on resumes, 99% chance they're going to use them, and that'll be great. But at the same time, you don't want to like over prepare to the point where this feels like you're delivering training to someone. And I think that's something that I've seen some people do. If you're the sort of person like me who likes to have a spreadsheet for everything and like kind of track how everything's going, this is not the place to do that. Don't force a relationship that isn't working is another really common thing. Again, some people work better with certain mentors than others. An example of this as well. Well, actually, I have this written down later, so I'll skip that for now. don't don't try to set objective, like again, like the objective key results OKRs, like don't try to set very specific measurable outcomes from this relationship. It's kind of like getting married to someone and setting like a specific really by 5 years we will have X, Y, and Z outcome. Like that's just not how interpersonal relationships work. And so we don't want to try to overprescribe what's going to come out of this. It's about their long-term goals. It's not about those short-term outcomes. For mentor matching, if you're doing this in a company, like how do you find a mentor? This is a really common thing I see a lot of people make mistakes on. The way that I like to approach it is you shouldn't be prescribing who is going to be with who, like who's going to mentor who. We always like to let the mentees kind of make some selections, or the way we do it is we have an automated process where they kind of pick their top 5 and we try to find them one of those top 5. There's a lot of reasons for this. Like certain people just work better with certain types of mentors. There was some research, there's been a bunch of research actually in colleges where they've had undergraduates mentored when they were new to a major. And for example, women who were mentored by men when they were peer mentors were less likely to get a lot out of the relationship. That might just be because college guys are probably not the most, respectful or something. There could be a lot of reasons for that. We're getting a lot of chat spam. Yeah, so there could be a lot of reasons for why that is, but like letting people choose their own mentors is important to us. And certainly at the very least, if you are going to prescribe mentors, like ideally, if you can find people that have commonalities, that tends to work out better. And then in terms of the relationship side, again, just like do let the mentee drive the relationship. Don't assume that the mentee will know how to where to drive the relationship, especially people who are newer in their careers. If I'm a student, like I probably don't know exactly what I need to do to get a job. And so I know that I want to get a job. That might be one of my goals. I might know generally where I want to work in the tech industry. I might not. And so a lot of times you don't want to tell people what they need to get out of this relationship or where they should go, but you need to give them enough guidance in terms of asking those questions to figure out where they're going to go. So that's kind of my list of do's and don'ts. Cool. When dealing with new graduates, what are some common things mentors should bring up but don't? And what about students in internships? Okay, so students, I'm going to start with students because it's kind of newer to the career, and there are a lot of things that if you're like hiring an intern or something like that and you want to be a mentor to them, which hopefully you should, there are so many things that students don't know that people who've been in the industry think that they will. And especially if you're talking about students who don't go to a top university, like if you go to like Berkeley or something, you're more likely to get this from your peers. A lot of people that we work with are from like community colleges and just never get this from their peers. People who are students have no idea what the different roles are in industry. They don't know what a program manager is. They don't know about the fact that, for example, if you're a technical person, you can go more on the technical individual contributor side or more on the management side. They don't know how technology generally works with like designers. There are so many different roles in the tech industry. Helping people build a map of how things work together is really helpful. I like to describe a big class of things that people assume students will know but don't is as the hiring flowchart. If you've been in a tech company, you've probably interviewed someone at some point, or at least like seen someone be interviewed or been interviewed enough times that you kind of know what's going on. Students don't know who reviews their resume when it gets in. They don't know what the process is. They know there's going to be an interview, but they don't know what that means. They don't know the difference between potentially a phone screen and an interview. They may have seen it if you hired them at your company, but they still haven't really internalized that this is a common thing that most companies are going to do. They have no idea what people are looking for. I think most people I've talked to in technology say that they don't really care about GPA or like which specific classes you took unless they're CS related. All the time, we have students who are college students who are graduating who put their GPA as 3.7 and they took like a list of every class that they took. That's not relevant. Students don't know that. They don't know, for example, if you go in a programming interview and you're asked a technical question, that the person is not necessarily expecting you to just immediately answer it. That's the way schools do it, right? You take a test, you're supposed to know the exact answer. In an interview for almost any role at a tech company, you're typically it's going to be a discussion. That's the goal. Students don't know that. They feel really bad. They struggle to it, and they never ask any questions about it at all. That's a really big class of problems. Just like how to make a good impression on those various people. And in that regard, like doing practicing is also really helpful if you are mentoring a student. For new graduates, financial is a really big one. I think people who've been in the tech industry or anything adjacent to that for a while kind of know things like, what is the value of getting stock? If you sign up at a company and they offer you stock, how do you think about that? How do you think about that as part of your compensation? What are the taxes involved in certain things? How do you set up a budget now that you're making, if this is a larger tech company, if you're mentoring someone who maybe is getting a job at Google or something, how do you deal with going from making, maybe $30,000 a year working part-time to all of a sudden making $200,000 a year? I've met people who are, 25, 26, making $200,000, $300,000 a year and worrying that they're never going to be able to retire. And I think that comes down to like people, don't have that experience. Some people who are especially programmers don't realize the value of networking, and that like a lot of people get jobs because they've met people in other companies who want to hire them for things. So that's a big one. Other than that, I would just say if you are mentoring someone who's kind of a newer graduate, a lot of it comes down to kind of interpersonal stuff. I've noticed that a lot of new graduates have difficulty kind of getting the feedback that they want. A lot of companies don't have a great system of like kind of one-on-ones, or like don't do performance reviews very frequently. And new graduates tend to like underestimate their performance and feel really bad and overwork themselves. So that's kind of something to bring up. Just like, do you have one-on-ones with your mentor? How do you feel about how you're doing? That kind of thing tends to go a really long way.
Great. I'm going to interrupt for a moment because we actually have a live audience question here from Hung, who is asking, what's the difference between a mentor versus an advisor?
Yeah, that is a good question. And again, part of it is like there's so many different ways people can define things. It kind of is up to the company what they want to consider. A lot of the time when I think of an advisor, I think of someone who's more involved in kind of day-to-day things. If you're, for example, starting a tech company and you want someone to be on your board of advisors, it means that you think they have very relevant experience to one specific thing, right? Like I have people on our board who are really good, who are like VP of engineering, for example, at a large company. And if I want to know about how a VP of engineering is going to think about this pitch that I'm trying to give, right, to try to raise money for a company, it's really helpful to have someone on our board who is sort of an advisor who can give me that really specific feedback that's useful for my day-to-day job. I like to think of a mentor as someone who is going to be concerned about the bigger picture, like for me personally, at least, I think of mentors again, usually more of that on the personal side, like where do I want to be in 10 years? Like, what are my, what makes me happy in this job? Where am I? Maybe if you want to get into like more tactical things, but still kind of that higher level stuff, how am I doing as a manager? What are the issues that I might have with transitioning into a role where I am managing a team of people instead of just being on my own? Those are all kind of the things that I think of the mentor, where it's like, it's things that are going to impact my entire career, versus advisors. I think of, people who are going to impact the day-to-day a little bit more.
And we have another question that was asked here, asking what's the ROI on mentorship?
Yeah, so what's the return on investment for mentorship? This is one of the things that I thought was very interesting when I started digging into the research on this. There have been a lot of studies, and not many of these have been at tech companies. So take all this with a grain of salt. But there have been a lot of studies among college students, because that's, academics do studies of people that are easy to reach. A lot of studies on college students that have shown that retention is about 2x. If someone has a mentor when they're placed in a new role, whether that be a new student who's coming in as an undergrad at a college, There have also been a lot of studies for new teachers because mentoring is very common in the education industry, profession. There we go. That's the word. The education profession, mentorship is really common. You've probably seen like student teachers. All of them have found that the retention is about 2x if you have a mentor versus if you don't. And so if you're starting to grow your company or something and you have, you've hired 2 or 3 developers or something, and maybe they're relatively new because that's kind of what you can afford. If you can provide them a mentor, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they're going to stick around a lot longer. And they're more likely to stick around. In terms of actual performance gains, typically 10 to 15% is what a lot of the studies show. Like people tend to be about 10 to 15% more effective. If you follow up kind of like after usually about a year of mentorship, they tend to be more effective, which is not as big of a difference as 2x, but like that's still a pretty sizable change. Higher return on investment for anyone who's in kind of a marginalized group, which can vary depending on the context. So in tech, a lot of folks are marginalized in tech, but even in industries where that's not as much the case, if you are a member of a group where you don't see a lot of people like you around you, the return tends to be like 150% baseline. So like a little bit more, 1.5 times as much. Yeah, the other thing that a lot of people don't actually think about is that being a mentor is actually really valuable. It like kind of plays into being a manager and managing teams as well. And so there've been a lot of research on teachers in particular, in that whenever they pair a student teacher up with a sort of more experienced teacher, both the student teacher get better and the teacher who's already really experienced also gets better at teaching. So that's another thing. And kind of the only study that I've seen that have actually tried to turn this into a dollar value has been with teachers. They found it was about $1.50 of value after 4 years for every dollar that was invested. Teachers don't get paid a lot, which is unfortunate, but tech people tend to get paid a lot more than teachers. And so I think if you're looking at this from just a financial perspective as a tech company, like the return on investment is probably a lot higher than $1.50 per dollar.
Great. And we have an anonymous question that was submitted asking, what's the best way for a company to set up a mentoring program?
Sure. So how do you set up a mentoring program? You have to kind of figure out, first of all, like where in a company are those places where people are starting to become like transition into a role that's unfamiliar to them, right? Because again, the thing mentoring is best at, people are in new situations where they're not really sure what their expectations are and they don't feel very comfortable. Most companies, I think that tends to be interns, very valuable, new hires straight out of college, and then people who are getting into management roles. If you are a leader of a company, once you start to hire people, if you haven't been in that experience of leading a company with employees before, by the way, which I think maybe many of people who are in this might be in that situation, you should find a mentor for yourself, just as a side note. But I'd look at that, the places where people are transitioning into roles that are vastly different from what they were doing before. Those are the places where it's good to do mentorship, and typically new grad hiring is going to be one of the biggest ones. Start by trying to figure out what are the common problems that people are having. So interviews with recent, maybe 1 year past joining the company or something like that would be a good place to try to find out what were the problems that people had. You can also find, again, there's studies, there's all sorts of things for trying to set up that the common issues that people are facing. Because again, like 99% of people, there's probably 80% of the problems that they all have in common. And if you can kind of make that list, what I find that's very helpful for us is making that list of what are the commonalities, what are the common problems that everyone's facing, turning that into some discussion points so that people know where to get the conversation started, rather than every mentor trying to figure it out themselves. And some of them are going to be better and some of them are going to be worse. And for me, like, with Code Day Labs, for example, which is where we've done a lot of our mentoring stuff, that's typically taken like maybe, a few days. So it's not a huge lift. I'm sure if you're a larger company, you can afford to spend more, but for a small company with even a few engineers, very doable, especially given the long-term impact. I like to, once I know those broad areas of problems that people are facing, I like to kind of turn that into some talking points for each one of them, because that means less work for each individual mentor, more, more benefit for everyone, right? Like it's less time. With Code Day Labs, one of the things that we've tried to do in particular is like, because we're trying to replicate that internship like experience, but we want to do it with volunteer mentors who don't have time for an actual intern. A lot of what we try to do is really just say, where is the mentor, the sort of, it's kind of in between a mentor and a manager, right? Because you're doing a little bit more of the day to day, but like, where is your time spent really well? Those are the discussions we want them to have. What are the things that we can tell those mentors to do? What's the best way to have that conversation? What are the talking points for each meeting? And we'll give them bullet points of like, here's some suggested, we call them topic outlines. Here's some suggested topic outlines. And, for each one of those topics, like, the mentors can kind of pick that up whenever they feel is appropriate, whenever it's an appropriate discussion. And they can kind of go through that, and it gives them some starting points for that. It helps save them a lot of time so that it makes it very easy for them. Really important when you are setting this to set time expectations. A lot of the studies of the effects of mentoring have been from organizations that have very established mentoring programs where there are like people who are designated as mentors who have time allocated to be mentors. For a lot of the teacher programs, many of them have teachers doing this like actually full time, and they'll have 15 mentees. You don't have to have 15 mentees, but if you're going to give someone one mentee, make sure that they have an hour a week to meet with them, or an hour every 2 weeks, or whatever is kind of appropriate for the pace that you're trying to get through this at. And then the last thing that I would say is probably like, just check in, again, we always want to try to measure things. I think in the tech industry, it's possible to try to measure too much, but in general, like, how are people feeling about their mentor-mentee relationship? How are the mentors feeling in terms of how supported they are from you as an organization? It's great to check in. And again, if you're 3-4 people, you can probably just follow up with all of the people one by one and just see how it's going. I help with an organization that's working with, I think, 300 students. And the person who runs this organization is just, he's just sending out a mail merge email and seeing how things are going. That's still very scalable, and not super hard. So this is very much a thing that a small company can do without too much effort. It just takes a few hours.
And awesome. I want to just remind everybody here, you did say you can go over a few minutes. We're coming up on 12:30 here, but we can extend the time a little bit. So if anyone has a question for Tyler, please go ahead and type that in the Q&A. But I was curious, I have my own question for you. So I was wondering, and there might not be one, but I'm curious, is there a big failure point that you often see where like that mentor-mentee relationship breaks down, or something that mentors do that kind of, creates problems?
I think that the biggest place where I see that is usually when the mentor and the mentee just like don't really connect on the, like, I guess, like, life experience sort of thing. A lot of who we work with, at least, are students who are coming from maybe lower income backgrounds. They work a part-time job to pay their way through college. And sometimes if the mentor is not thoughtful about that and not thinking about the fact that this person is having a little bit different of an experience than I am, that can cause a lot of difficulties in their relationship, because the mentee just feels like the mentor doesn't really get what they're talking about. And, at the same time, a lot of the tech professionals that we have right now are people who've gone through, traditional 4-year college route straight out of high school. They got a degree. They know a lot of friends who are in that thing. And so the things that they think to talk about are very different from the things that the students actually want to know about. And that goes back to, like, what do people look for in an internship, or sorry, in a resume? What does a career trajectory look like? Some of the students don't even know what a tech salary looks like. Like, is a $50,000 starting salary out of the question? that it, like, is that achievable? And it's like, yes. Um, so I think a lot of it just comes down to not thinking through maybe and understanding where this person is coming from and what goals they have for their future. That's probably the biggest point where I've seen a lot of people just don't get it. And part of that just comes down to like taking the time to ask questions, try to ask more questions than spend more time asking questions than you're answering them. Maybe taking 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning or end of sessions to jot down your thoughts on what you want to talk about or what you want to talk about next time. You just got to put in a little bit more time sometimes if the person doesn't immediately click with you. And then at a company side, trying to pair people up who have a little bit more similar backgrounds is pretty helpful.
So we actually have a couple more questions here. I'm happy that you're able to stay with us a little bit longer. One of the questions that we got in is, how long should a mentorship program be? Should it end at some point?
Yeah, typically most of the studies that I've seen have been between 6 months to a year. That seems to be a pretty good duration. Because again, like the goal of most mentoring programs is really just to get people feeling comfortable in their role and feeling like they kind of know what's right for them. So if you're setting up something formal, like I would say try to do, meetings at least maybe every 2 weeks to a month, if you can, for 6 months to a year. And kind of take it from there. A lot of what we've seen has been, for Code Day Labs, for example, we do a little bit more of an intensive program because it's over the summer. And we'll do a few meetings a week, usually 2 meetings a week. So it's not too much time still, but it's a little bit more of an intensive program. Part of that is going through the details of the project too, because it's kind of a crossover with managers. But from that, a lot of the students at the end of the summer still keep in touch with the with the mentors, and they'll send them an email or a LinkedIn message or something 6 months later, either an update on where they're at or maybe a question that they've been struggling with. And that's been more of the norm of what I've seen. I've worked as well. Like I've had mentors in my role, and I'll still send them a message every year or so, but it's not anything where we're meeting pretty regularly. So I think 6 months to a year tends to be a good time frame, but it kind of depends also on what you're trying to get out of it.
Great. And we have another question. What are some ways a mentor can improve their skills in mentoring?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, like the biggest improvement that I see most mentors need to make is just asking questions. If your mentee is okay with it, actually just kind of recording your sessions and going back through it, I personally have found to be very enlightening. And some of the mentors we worked with have actually, I've recommended they do that, and they find that very enlightening as well. This goes for anything, like just recording yourself to talk. I'm sure I'll watch this video back later and I'll be like, man, I was talking too fast and there were like 3 points I forgot to cover. That I found that to be very helpful for mentors. You start to realize maybe where you shouldn't have interrupted the student, or you should have waited a little bit longer to make them more uncomfortable with the silence that they ask you a question, things like that. Other than that, there are really good resources online on mentoring. There's a really good book kind of related to this, not 100% related to this, called The Coaching Habit. I have it here. Say less, ask more, and change the way you lead forever. It's a little bit more day-to-day. It's not entirely focused on mentorship, but I found that to be pretty helpful. There's probably a few others as well. But if you're just starting out and you're looking for like a really high impact way to improve yourself as a mentor, I would just say, yeah, record your conversation once and listen back to it. And I think that you can gain a lot from that.
Awesome. Well, I don't think we have any more questions from the audience. I'm going to have to play back this video to get all of your answers again. But luckily we'll be publishing this on YouTube, so that's possible. Any last advice, tips, anything else for the audience? And I do want you to say a few words about Code Day and Code Day Labs, because that's right in line with mentorship. And if someone's looking to be a mentor, you've got opportunities for them.
Yes, absolutely. My biggest word of advice is if your company doesn't already have a mentorship program, start something. If you personally don't work at a, if you personally work at a company, you can't do a mentorship program or whatever, like find someone to help who's newer in their career. It's so rewarding. There are people that I've met who I've been something of a mentor to, even if not formally, 5-10 years ago, who are now doing amazing things. And, like we had a student really early on who was a high school dropout, who went through our program back when it was small enough that I could personally be a mentor to him. He was working at a Best Buy. He is now I think he's a senior he's actually now a staff engineer at a 500-person company. And prior to this, he was running an R&D team at a 200-person company. That's so rewarding to me to feel like I was even a small part of helping him find a place in technology for him. So it's so rewarding. That's kind of my last bit of advice is just try to do that. And yeah, as you mentioned, and as I mentioned at the beginning, we do a thing called Code Day Labs. We try to provide an internship-like experience for students who don't have the ability to do that. Again, because a lot of them work part-time jobs, they're a primary caretaker for their family, or just because the big tech companies overlook them. They work on open source projects under the guidance of an industry mentor. And that's a little bit management, but a lot of it is just that higher level stuff. How do you think about Googling a problem, that sort of level of things? And that is very valuable for a lot of these students. It's not a huge time commitment. I think it's about 2 hours a week for 5 weeks starting in July. So if you'd like to be a mentor for that and help one of these students get their start in their career, labs.codeday.org, or just go to codeday.org and click on labs, and you can find all the information there. We'd really love to have you, and it's not a huge time commitment. And again, it makes a pretty big difference.
Awesome. Tyler, thank you so much for joining us today, for answering all our questions about mentorship. I'm going to go out and actually get in touch with my mentee after this. I'm prompted to do so. Codeday.org, check them out. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.